Tonight, breaking news captured. The suspect in that New York City subway attack arrested after more than 24 hours on the run. 62-year-old Frank James taken into custody in Manhattan after police sources tell NBC News he called the tip in himself, saying, quote, "You're looking for me." James now facing federal charges, accused of firing 33 rounds inside of a Brooklyn train during the morning rush, shooting 10 people. New video showing him entering the transit system 2 hours before. And tonight, the cousins who spotted James on the street today and flagged police the moment they say they realized who he was. Tornadoes strike. Several twisters reported in the Midwest and the South. One in Texas, ripping apart homes and injuring nearly 24 people. The state also battered with hail, measuring 5.5 inches. Storms now moving into the northeast with wind gusts of up to 65 miles per hour possible. Al Roker standing by. Mask battle. The Biden administration extending a mask mandate on planes, trains, and other transit systems into early May. Airlines pushing back on the guidance, but it comes as COVID cases across the country once again are climbing. Back up at the border, truckers waiting up to 12 hours at one of the busiest trade ports between the U.S. and Mexico. The delays coming after a new order by the Texas governor to add additional inspections to trucks coming into the state. Will it affect already skyrocketing produce prices? Sentencing outrage the 19-year-old accused of sexual assault who will not face any jail time. The decision by the judge that's sparking outrage from the victim and her family, who say the teen is out golfing and dining out while he's supposed to be on house arrest. And flipping out, the scary moment a dolphin appears to attack a trainer at the Miami Aquarium. Animal advocates say it's not the first time. Top story starts right now. Hey, good evening. New Yorkers breathing a bit easier tonight after the suspect in that subway attack was arrested after a nearly 30-hour citywide manhunt. 62-year-old Frank James, you see him right there, walked out of a police precinct in Manhattan and on his way to jail for a shooting on a train in Brooklyn that left nearly 24 people injured. He's now facing federal charges and could spend decades behind bars. Cell phone video shows police taking James into custody in the popular East Village after NYPD sources confirmed to NBC News that he called a police tip line and told them he was at a McDonald's. When police arrived, he was not there. But two cousins spotted him from a nearby store and flagged officers down. Like many New Yorkers, they say they were unable to focus until he was caught. Police are still trying to piece together why he opened a smoke canister on a train during the morning rush hour and then opened fire. Video obtained by NBC New York showing him getting into the subway 2 hours before the attack, dressed in construction equipment and carrying multiple bags. Investigators do believe he traveled to New York prior to the shooting and are now combing over Facebook posts and arrest records. NBC's Ron Allen leads us off tonight with the latest on this investigation.
Tonight, a collective sigh of relief in New York City.
Frank, why'd you shoot all those people?
62-year-old Frank R. James is in custody, charged with a federal crime after the bloody attack in a Brooklyn subway station during rush hour. Governor Kathy Hochul announcing the news.
The suspect has been arrested.
The arrest comes after a 28-hour manhunt, police releasing several images of the suspect and appealing to the public for help. In a bizarre twist, law enforcement officials say it was James himself who called the Crime Stoppers tip line, saying he heard police were looking for him and he was at a McDonald's in Manhattan's East Village. He said his phone was dying, so they should come quickly. Officers rushed there, but he was already gone. They found James nearby, and he was taken into custody without incident around 1:30.
We were able to shrink his world quickly. There was nowhere left for him to run.
This video from early Tuesday morning shows James entering the subway in Brooklyn, struggling to get through the turnstile before going through an emergency exit. 2 hours later, investigators say he opened fire on the crowded train. 10 people were shot, 29 total injured, including kids heading to school. One victim just 12 years old. Police say James then used the subway to flee, getting on a train across the platform, riding one stop, shoulder to shoulder with some of his victims. He later entered a station in another Brooklyn neighborhood. Law enforcement now piecing together his past.
He is known to us and has ties in Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York City.
James was born in New York and has 9 arrests here dating back to 1992. Charges including criminal sex acts and possession of burglary tools. Police say he purchased the Glock 9mm handgun used in the attack at an Ohio pawn shop in 2011. There are dozens of posts from James on social media, many filled with profanity-laced rants about race, violence, and even mocking New York Mayor Eric Adams for trying to make the subway safer.
And I'm on my way to Philadelphia.
In this video, James talks about traveling from Milwaukee to Philadelphia, where police say he rented the U-Haul van found a few miles from the scene of the attack. Investigators still haven't determined a motive or why the suspect attacked the 36th Street stop. Tonight, that station is once again filled with commuters.
The city runs on the subway.
And you feel perfectly safe?
Yeah.
All right, Ron Allen joins us now from outside the police precinct where Frank James was brought into custody. So, Ron, even though authorities believe they have their man, police are still asking for help from the public, more video, more witnesses to come forward. What do they still want to know?
They want to know why, and they want to know what he was plotting to do. He had a tremendous amount of ammunition, other kinds of weapons, gasoline, fireworks, and there's no explanation yet as to why he staged this attack, allegedly, in this Brooklyn neighborhood. Was he planning to go on into Manhattan, a few more stops down the line, and do something bigger, larger? They don't know. We also know today that he left the attack scene on one train, moved over to another train across the platform with some of his victims and continued on for some time for another stop. Did he say anything? They want witnesses to come forward to try and understand what he was up to. And until they do know better, they won't be sure that he acted alone, and they won't be sure that this is entirely over.
All right. Ron Allen leading us off tonight. Ron, we thank you for that. It's staying in the East Village. It was 2 cousins there who spotted the suspect as they were installing security cameras and recognized him. They then flagged down police. Those cousins shared their raw emotions about the arrest with reporters, including our very own Jesse Kirsch outside of that police precinct.
I was doing the business security cameras, and we showed this guy. I was with my cousin and the amigo guy, and I see him, the guy, and we say, oh my God, this is the guy.
We were like between 70 to 80% sure, is it him, is it not? So we pull up the picture, the Amber Alert on our phones. We saw the picture. So we confirmed it between the 3 of us. Oh, that's the guy. That's the 100% sure that's him. So we were ready to call the police. We saw the 2 guys from the police department pulling up on the street. So we go to them. We tell them, oh, he's like 1 block away. He's over there wearing a cap, carrying his bag, and going over there. We went with them, and they catch him right away.
Did the police run toward him? Did they approach calmly? What did it look like?
They directly recognized him. They directly approached him and put the handcuffs in his hand because
did he fight?
Yeah.
Did he fight back?
No. He didn't fight. He didn't do anything. Like, he totally surrendered and go with them. But like, they took his bag because we don't know what's in the bag. You know, we don't know if he's still carrying his weapon. He's armed. He's dangerous. So we tried as much as we can to protect ourselves. Like, first reaction, we want to catch the guy. You know, because like, we saw a guy, a criminal, but you know, he's armed, he's dangerous, so we're gonna like also take care from this. So
how was he acting? Was he smiling? Was he sad? Were they
no, he was walking normal, like
walking,
he was walking
chilling, like as if he didn't do anything,
man.
Like he didn't say anything to us. No, we didn't.
He think the police is not gonna catch him, and the police catch him. Thank you, police.
Yeah.
So we heard there from those 2 cousins who spotted him. For more on the arrest of Frank James, I want to bring in NBC News law enforcement analyst and former NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea. Former Commissioner, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. I have to ask you, do you know from your sources still in the police department what this man's problem was with the city of New York, with the subway system, and with Mayor Adams?
No, but that's going to be, Tom, that's the focus now. I think that all of New York City breathed a sigh of relief. And then I can tell you from the investigative point of view, the work really starts now after the apprehension, and that will be the focus, the why. And there's a number of reasons for that. They want to leave no stone unturned in terms of could anyone else have supplied any support for this? And the answer thus far has been no, and that's good news. But they also want to build as prosecutable a case as possible. So every stone in this man's life will be turned upside down. from the time of the incident, working backwards. His electronic devices will be turned over to the authorities, and they will obtain search warrants to get into them. What was he searching for? Who might he have called in the days leading up to it? So the work now really continues from an investigative point of view, and I think we all join in together, though, with a collective sigh of relief.
You know, the current commissioner right now said that they made his world smaller in New York. And I know there were probably hundreds of police officers, detectives, if not thousands, working the street nonstop for this. But this man, Frank James, wasn't necessarily a criminal mastermind, right? He leaves behind the key. He leaves behind all these clues, and then he turns himself in. Do you think police would have caught up with him if he wouldn't have called?
There is no doubt in my mind that he would have been apprehended by members of the Regional Fugitive Task Force and our partners. But this is a good story. And in terms of, you know, the net shrinking around him, it's hard to get into the criminal's mind in cases like this, for sure. But we've seen things like this before. We've seen in some, you know, some significant cases, people literally walk into precincts where at some point, for whatever goes on in their mind, they just are tired of running and they have nowhere else to go. So this ended like we all would like to see it from the law enforcement perspective, without any further violence. And now, as we said, we'll continue to build the case, try to get some answers why, for a lot of reasons, not just for this case, but how do you prevent the next one from ever happening? And that's the goal of law enforcement.
You know, on that point, you were the former commissioner in the last administration, Mayor Bill de Blasio. A lot of New Yorkers are upset with crime. Crime is up throughout the city. This is sort of a strange, possibly isolated incident, but a lot of New Yorkers say, and I live here, talking to my friends and family that live around here, say this sort of feeds into this sense that you have as a New Yorker that the city is not safe, the subway is not safe. There's a lot of people who are mentally unstable, and nothing is being done right now. How do you explain to people what's happened with New York City?
Well, I would say that, it's sad that an incident like this, sometimes you see the best in people coming together as well. And that's how I think collectively we're going to get New York City back to where we want to be. Everyone. And when I say everyone, it certainly starts when law enforcement doing their job. And I think New Yorkers know that they have an awfully professional police department in the NYPD with much help from partners. But it literally takes neighborhood by neighborhood, all New Yorkers working in the same direction, members of the clergy, elected officials, all making small fixes, getting back to where we want to be. And New York is a place like no other. It's a city like no other, where the city never sleeps. But it's still a great place.
You think the subways are safe?
You start to see
subways
it come
are safe?
back. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a terrible, horrific incident, no doubt. I ride the subways every day, Tom. And I can tell you that the subways are safe. When you look at Jason Wilcox, the chief of transit right now, does a phenomenal job with the men and women of the Transit Bureau. Mayor Adams is saying absolutely all the right things in terms of his backing up the NYPD. So there's no doubt in my mind, New York City, great times ahead.
Former NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea. Former Commissioner, we thank you for your time. Thanks so much. We want to turn now to another dangerous day for tornadoes. Dozens of people in Texas are injured after a tornado tore through two small towns. Homes were wiped away and buildings there reduced to rubble. Sam Brock in the Storm Zone tonight.
Mother Nature's 4-week assault continues tonight in states like Texas, Missouri, and Arkansas.
That's big.
Under tornado watch again after already suffering heavy blows.
I was just lucky that I didn't get sucked out.
The storm producing a lightning strike bonanza stretching 1,000 miles from Minnesota to the Gulf Coast, affecting 45 million people, while pumping out blizzards in North Dakota, twisters in Iowa, including this big rig barely outrunning a tornado.
It's gonna hit that barn. It's gonna hit that semi. There it goes.
And Texas sustaining the biggest strike of all overnight. A powerful tornado carving an 8-mile-long path in Salado, wiping out dozens of homes and injuring 23 people.
I could just barely hear my wife mumbling because I was screaming it for her, trying to find where she's at.
The house collapsed, but miraculously, they all survived.
How amazed are you that you're standing here having this conversation with me today?
Pretty much. because I thought I was fixing to die.
Wilson's daughter-in-law explaining the joy of having her family alive as she uncovered precious keepsakes.
We're very grateful, very blessed.
One of the many buildings devastated here in Salado is this church, which not only had its roof ripped right off, but the entire rear portion of the building is now reduced to brick and rubble.
This is a large bump in the road, but it's not defeating us by any means.
Millions of Americans now bracing for whatever is thrown their way next. Sam Brock, NBC News, Salado, Texas.
And late today, tornado sirens were heard in Memphis, Tennessee, with millions in the path for severe storms, including damaging wind gusts. So I want to bring in again Al Roker with a look at what's ahead. And Al, I know there's a lot of tornado sirens popping right now.
I know, it's crazy. Right now, we're looking at tornado watches stretching from southern Indiana all the way down into Mississippi, parts of Louisiana, on into Texas as this system makes its way to the east. So what we're looking at right now, 31 million people at risk, wind gusts of 75 miles per hour. We're talking nocturnal tornadoes twice as deadly as the daytime, and damaging hail in this area here. Storm impacts, significant wind gusts, 75 miles or more from Evansville, Nashville, Greenville, Jackson, Little Rock. As far as tornadoes are concerned, EF3 or greater from Memphis, Little Rock, on into Evansville, Nashville, Tupelo as well. As this system moves east, 28 million people at risk all along the I-95 corridor, wind gusts, damaging hail, and we cannot rule out a tornado. So here we go. This cold front pushing to the east, overnight storms racing through the Tennessee Valley. We're looking at areas of flooding from Missouri all the way down to Louisiana. Then tomorrow, it sweeps into the northeast and New England with heavy rain and high winds for the I-95 corridor. The afternoon rush is going to be a real mess. We look for areas of flooding likely down through the lower Mississippi River Valley down into the Gulf. And behind that system, we still have winter storms brewing like crazy, drifting snow, dangerous travel, another 6 to 12 inches of snow from the Dakotas. The only good news out of this is in the Sierra. They're looking at about 1 foot or 2 of snow. And Tom, that's good news as far as their reservoirs are concerned.
Yeah, they need water over there. All right, Al, we appreciate that. And we'll have more from Al in his exclusive interview with President Obama coming up later in the broadcast. For now, we want to focus on COVID. The CDC says it will extend the federal mask mandate on planes, trains, and buses as new COVID cases rise across the U.S. after weeks of public pressure from airlines. The agency is mandating masks through May 3rd, even though many mask mandates have been rolled back across the country. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer has the latest.
The 2-week extension of the federal mask mandate on public transportation impacts tens of millions of Americans every day. With the order set to expire next week and now extended into next month, passengers in the air, on the ground, and riding the rails will still need their masks. Today, the CDC citing a rise in new infections.
It isn't like things are static. Things are moving. We're seeing an increase throughout the country.
Often a point of controversy and confrontation. The FAA has received complaints of over 1,100 unruly passengers just this year, more than half related to wearing a mask. After weeks of pressure and just hours before today's announcement, airlines lobbied for change.
It's time to let the masks go and let people decide.
Today, Airlines for America urged the CDC to end pre-departure testing for international flights and domestic mask mandates, saying neither restriction is currently supported by data and science.
It's outlived its usefulness at this point. We don't understand why this continues for airlines and does not continue for restaurants, bars, sporting events, take your pick.
With airlines and Americans eager to return to normalcy, tonight the face of travel remains the same for now. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
Miguel, for that, we want to turn now to the growing frustration at the U.S.-Mexico border, where trucker protests and additional border inspections have brought one of the nation's busiest trading ports to a standstill. The drivers calling out Texas Governor Abbott's latest border security measures, a move that the governor says is intended to curb human and drug smuggling, but critics are calling it redundant and that it's instead hurting the supply chain. Vaughn Hilliard has the latest.
Tonight, frustration growing, and so are the lines at one of the busiest trade ports at the Texas-Mexico border.
Estamos viendo que no tenemos apoyo de nadie. Sin comida, sin agua, sin baño, y la mera verdad,
Por eso los operadores cerraron el paso.
For 3 days, truckers carrying fresh produce and other cargo have been protesting, stuck at a standstill at the Far Reynosa International Bridge near McAllen, Texas. Some now waiting as long as 12 hours to enter the country.
They're idling at $5 a gallon. Well, it's really hurting us a lot.
The protests coming after a new order by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who is now requiring state troopers to inspect trucks coming into Texas, a second checkpoint following the usual inspection by U.S. Customs and Border officials.
Cartels use vehicles, many of them dangerous commercial trucks, to smuggle immigrants, deadly fentanyl, and other illegal cargo into Texas.
Just a week ago, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers seized over $13 million in narcotics at the Far Bridge inside a commercial truck coming from Mexico. But critics argue the impact goes far beyond these safety measures. Today, the White House adding pressure. Press Secretary Jen Psaki condemning Abbott's orders in a statement calling them redundant, that the disruptions to trade are impacting jobs and raising prices for families in Texas and across the country. Business owners in Texas now warning shoppers should expect food shortages in the next few days.
Putting this inspection and creating this disruptive to the supply chain is not the correct answer.
Abbott at a presser today announcing that he will stop the measures at the port of entry with Nuevo Leon, Mexico, after he reached an agreement with the local governor to ramp up border security on the Mexican side.
The bridge from Nuevo Leon and Texas will return to normal, effective immediately, right now.
But Abbott doubling down on all other ports of entry. Till then, the truck lines at this stop are still hours long. Vaughn Hilliard, NBC News.
All right, we thank Vaughn for that one. Still ahead tonight, the sentencing outrage. The man accused of multiple sexual assaults out on house arrest, why he was able to plead guilty and avoid jail time. Plus, the violent scene in downtown L.A. Take a look at this. Thieves hitting a woman with a car and then stealing her watch? Why police fear it's part of a pattern. And the California woman who claims she was kidnapped and held captive, now admitting the whole thing was a hoax. Her apology before she faced sentencing. Top story, just getting started on this Wednesday night. All right, next up, you may remember the name Sherry Papini. She was a young wife and mother who claimed she was kidnapped. She appeared in court today and she admitted the whole thing was made up. Steve Patterson has more.
Tonight, the California woman who went missing in November of 2016, only to mysteriously reappear weeks later claiming she was kidnapped, in court after agreeing to a plea deal, finally admitting on Tuesday the purported abduction that launched a nationwide search 6 years ago was all a hoax. Her lawyer says she will enter a plea next Monday, guilty of counts of lying to a federal officer and mail fraud. Papini released a statement through her lawyer, reading in part, "I am deeply ashamed of myself for my behavior and so very sorry for the pain I've caused my family, my friends, all the good people who needlessly suffered because of my story." Adding, "I will work the rest of my life to make amends for what I have done." NBC cameras were with detectives who worked on her case, now reacting with relief.
The purpose is done. The case is done, essentially. At the end of the day, I think this is a good resolution for everybody in our community, across the nation.
Those detectives spent hours investigating her claims after vanishing from her home in Redding, California. She was found in Yolo County, 150 miles from home, battered and in chains on the side of a highway on Thanksgiving. Papini says she'd been kidnapped and tortured by 2 Hispanic women. Her husband describing the injuries to ABC News.
The bruises were just intense. The bumps from, being hit and kicked and whatever else. They branded her.
Those injuries eventually revealed to be self-inflicted with the help of an ex-boyfriend. DNA evidence from Papini's clothing linking them together. He told investigators Papini had orchestrated everything, choosing to leave her husband and children to stay with him. Papini reportedly told him to buy a wood-burning kit to brand her to make her story more believable. Papini's mail fraud charge stemming from the money she collected from the hoax. She received nearly $80,000.
The community stood up for her and offered her not only monetary funds, but emotional, moral support. And it's just a complete farce for law enforcement and for the nation. And so somebody has to be held accountable.
All right, Steve Patterson joins us now live from Los Angeles. And Steve, I understand that Papini has just left the courtroom. What can you tell us?
Tom, our NBC News team inside the courtroom tells me she was there to answer some routine questions, mainly to establish if she understands the penalty she now faces. I'm told she appeared very nervous and on the verge of tears as she answered the judge and gave no statement as she left. Tom?
Steve Patterson for us tonight. Steve, we thank you for that. We want to move now to South Carolina, where a young man accused of sexual assault will not serve time in prison. It's partly because the alleged crimes were committed when he was a minor. Isa Gutierrez spoke with the girl at the center of this case. She and her family are troubled by this outcome.
Tonight in South Carolina, this man charged with 2 sexual assaults pleads guilty to lesser crimes and goes home without serving time in prison.
I need you to tell me that you're guilty of committing assault and battery in the first degree.
The alleged victim's family is outraged.
He completely violated me. And so for him to be charged with something that doesn't even fit the crime, that just makes no sense to me.
It looks like he received an award for bad behavior.
Prosecutors in Broward County, South Carolina say Bowen Turner, 16 years old at the time, sexually assaulted his classmate Dallas Stoller in April of 2018 while at a high school party. Her father says he recalls when she came home.
She's also very upset. Dallas, where did this come from? What's going on with this?
Turner was arrested and charged with first-degree criminal sexual conduct.
He had a house arrest GPS monitor. His attorneys requested for that GPS monitor to be removed in April of 2019. The court agreed.
In 2019, while he was out on bond, another alleged assault of then 16-year-old Chloe Bess at a party in Orangeburg County. He was arrested again.
How did they let this happen? They were in charge and supposed to be watching over him.
Turner was charged with first-degree criminal sexual assault.
He then forced her to the ground, and, Your Honor, a sexual assault took place at that time. Your Honor, this case is very similar to the original incident.
She did not resist. She did not scratch. She did not punch. She did not call out. When asked point blank, did she say no? She didn't. Well, guess what? You just had sex on the ground with a boy you don't really know, and you get up and you feel ashamed.
On Friday, Bowen Turner pleaded guilty to lesser charges of assault and battery in the case involving Chloe Bess and received a sentence of 5 years of probation under the Youthful Offender Act.
When I first found out that that was even an option to be offered to him, I immediately was like, absolutely not.
If he has completed 5 years without any violation, have done all of the counseling necessary, then he will not have to register as a sex offender.
There's no words to describe how I was feeling. It was almost surreal.
We also learned at that same time that the Second Circuit Solicitor's Office would also be dismissing the case involving Dallas Stoller.
Dallas Stoller passed away in November of 2021.
The day before my 52nd birthday, I lost my baby girl. And it's just tough. She tried to keep going in spite of what happened to her 3.5 years ago.
Adding to the outrage, the family's attorney filed court documents pointing to GPS monitoring data, alleging Turner violated the rules of his house arrest dozens of times, visiting golf courses, restaurants, and stores while he was supposed to be at home. Ford says the judge did not allow them to argue the motion to revoke bond.
It suggests to me someone who slipped through the cracks, but it also suggests to me that there was a lack of accountability.
We reached out to Bowen, his attorney, and the prosecutors trying the case and have not heard back.
After Friday, I feel like a chapter is closed, but I'm not done with the book yet. I wake up every day and think about it.
All right, Isa joins us now in studio. So, Isa, we heard the judge there talk about this young man not being put on the sex offender registry, but we're also talking about a case of sexual assault.
That's right, Tom. The key thing to remember here is that Bowen Turner did not plead guilty to sexual assault charges, even though he was charged for those as an adult, by the way, even though he was a minor at the time of the incidents. And what Barbara McQuaid, our legal analyst, said is that is very, very common in sexual assault cases for the defendant to be offered a plea deal to lesser charges. Now, usually, she said, the victim's input should be considered in this decision-making process, and that is what the these families, both the Stallers and the Besses, do not feel happened here, and they're really upset about that. Tom, we did reach out to the judge who sentenced Bowen Turner on Friday. He said that he could not give us any information about the case because of ethical reasons.
Issa, thanks so much for joining us. When we come back, the frightening scene at the Miami Seaquarium, a dolphin attacking a trainer as families watched. The statement from the facility as it already faces a federal investigation. Stay with us. All right, we are back now with Top Stories Newsfeed, and we begin with a violent robbery caught on camera in L.A. Video showing a woman fleeing from a group of robbers after police say they smashed her car window while she was stopped at a red light. One of the suspects then hits her with a car before another rips a watch off her wrist. The woman suffered minor injuries. Police say it's the latest in a string of robberies targeting upscale shopping districts in L.A. Next to that dolphin attack we've been telling you about, video from an audience member at the Miami Seaquarium shows the dolphin striking the trainer, forcing her underwater. The trainer, who was not seriously injured, then swimming to the dock. The Seaquarium says the dolphin reacted after it accidentally collided with the trainer moments before, but the facility is under federal investigation over a series of animal deaths, and this dolphin has attacked a trainer before. All right, turning now to the latest on the war in Ukraine tonight. President Biden authorizing another $800 million in military aid to Ukraine, including artillery, armored personnel carriers, and helicopters. This announcement comes as the war on the ground rages on. Gabe Gutierrez went to a battlefield where the Russians were driven out.
Outside Kyiv, Ukrainians are scrambling to clear landmines, tripwires, and booby traps. New dangers after the Russian retreat. Today, we drove to the village of Andriivka, where Ukrainian troops are removing ammunition Russian soldiers left behind. This was once the front line, now a dirt road littered with weapons of war. It was an intense fight. The Russian troops were trying to advance, but took heavy fire from the Ukrainians. A direct hit on this tank. But the battlefield was actually Olha Litvin's backyard. She'd lived in this home for 34 years. She says the Russians told her family to leave or be killed. We have no words to describe our anger and our sorrow, she says. This is the cellar where the Russian troops took shelter for several weeks. You can see it's tight in here, it's very cold, and they left their jackets behind. The war is now escalating elsewhere. In these latest satellite images, a Russian military convoy can be seen still creeping into eastern Ukraine. Local officials there say new deadly airstrikes have ravaged Kharkiv, and bomb disposal teams are now scouring neighborhoods. Today, the presidents of Poland and 3 Baltic countries visited Kyiv to show solidarity. The U.S. also just announced a new $800 million aid package to Ukraine, including helicopters, more Javelin missiles, and for the first time, heavy artillery. But Ukraine's President Zelensky today again asking for more, including tanks and combat jets. So will the new help be enough? West of Kyiv, this is the second bombed school we visited in as many days. This is what it used to look like. Principal Hanna Palavach cries when she sees it now. The Russians were driving their tanks and shooting, she says, and the kids saw it all. Tonight, the students are safe, but their teachers are shaken as Ukraine wonders what's next. And the focus is once again shifting to the fighting in the besieged southern port city of Mariupol. The Russians are now claiming that more than 1,000 Ukrainian troops have surrendered there, though that has not been verified. Tonight, a senior U.S. defense official says that the Russians still have not taken that besieged city. Tom?
Gabe Gutierrez with the latest from the battle in Mariupol. Gabe, we thank you for that. Back here at home, and money talks. The growing questions from Americans tonight over who to blame over inflation. A new economic survey from CNBC found many Americans may be pointing a finger at President Biden, with his approval rating sinking to a new low. But the survey also gave us a lot of insight into how Americans are thinking about their money and their investments. CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman joins us now. Steve, this survey is full of headlines. I've been watching you all day on CNBC. I wanted to get you on top stories so viewers can get in on some of this action. First up, President Biden, can we say that Americans think the buck stops with him when it comes to inflation? Is that fair to say?
I think that's right. I think that what's happening with inflation in the economy right now is echoing directly back on his approval ratings. We're at 38%, a new low for his presidency. It's our fourth quarterly survey during his presidency. And of course, his economic approval rating down to 35%, a dramatic turnaround for him, the fourth decline we've had in all four surveys. And he's not doing much better, by the way, on people's views of his handling on the war in Ukraine. He's at 40% with 49% disapproving.
Pretty tough. Steve, this also stood out to me. Only 1 in 5 Americans describe their personal financial situation as getting ahead. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it's interesting you pick up on that because we've been doing this poll for over 15 years now. A lot of times what we find is that people have this attitude of the country going to hell in a handbasket, but their personal financial situation doing okay. That was not the case this time. 1 in 5 are saying that they're doing well and they're getting ahead, but 1 in 10 say that they're falling behind, and another 10% say they're not doing much better than that they're slipping. So it turns out that what is happening right now, people's views of the national economy, they're feeling it in their personal lives and how that they view where they're going with their own finances.
Steve, you know, this is kind of sort of outside the survey, but when I talk to people about the economy, I always say it's so confusing. We covered a lot on Top Story, but having said that and found that in this survey, Americans, though, are still spending so much, right, on travel, on leisure, on homes, right? Real estate prices are through the roof. How do we explain that? How do you explain that?
So that's an excellent observation. I'll tell you what's most important about it is this is a very negative track, we would call it, in our survey. It's not necessarily decisive if it doesn't continue, which is to say, if we continue to get numbers like this next quarter, if the monthly consumer sentiment numbers remain down, then you could see a decline in spending. But you are correct. Consumer spending numbers have been relatively robust. Some of the gains have been the result of inflation, but even on top of that, we have seen some gains out there. It's also kind of remarkable right now where we're at. 3.6%, near record unemployment rate. We've been adding 1.7 million jobs added in the first 3 months of the year. So it is fascinating to me as an economics reporter to see the one bad thing, which admittedly is pretty bad, the inflation rate completely color people's views on the economy and the president. I think there's some room for it to improve if the inflation rate can be brought down and the unemployment rate not skyrocket as a result.
Finally, the last finding I wanted to talk about, we know investor sentiment over stocks hitting a historic low. Talk to me about that, and what do Americans think right now are safe investments?
This is a fascinating part of it. First of all, the lowest numbers we've had for a good time to invest at just 28%, the way, in the 15-year history of the survey. And again, a very low number for those saying, a very high number for those saying it's a bad time to invest. When it comes to the best investments right now, people say real estate was up 10 points from when we last asked the question 2 years ago. Gold is up there, and stocks have slipped down to 16% of the public saying that's the best investment. Fascinatingly, just 2 points below stocks, first time we've asked about it, cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin coming in at 14%. We're going to have to watch that very carefully to see how high that goes. And it's fascinating to me right now that people are, a broad section of the public, I ask these questions, I don't know where it's going to end up. I thought maybe we'd come into the 7-8% range for the public even knowing about it, let alone and think it's a good investment. It was double my expectation, which is one of the things that makes it interesting to do these surveys. But still, we're going to have to watch that because that could be something where it shows that Americans see cryptocurrencies as a bona fide asset right along with stocks, corporate bonds, treasuries, and gold and real estate.
Steve, we thank you for that, and cryptocurrency is what we tackle in our next report from the Americas. Tonight we go inside El Salvador, the first country to adopt Bitcoin as its legal tender. President Nayib Bukele hoping to make the country the world's crypto capital, but are his citizens on board? Our Gadi Schwartz went to San Salvador to find out.
¿Ustedes toman Bitcoin? No, no solamente efectivo? All right, just cash. ¿Toman Bitcoin? No, okay. ¿Toman Bitcoin? No, okay. Bitcoin? No, tampoco. So we're in Surf City. This is one of the major draws for tourists in this area. So far, every single store that we've asked, no one's accepting Bitcoin.
It's been 7 months since the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, declared Bitcoin as legal tender.
It's the evolution of humankind. So we're going there.
But so far, the first country to adopt Bitcoin as currency has seen confusion, glitchy transactions, and fluctuating prices that have left most Salvadorans slow to adopt. As foreign investors watch the president declare a state of emergency due to gang violence while facing questions over human rights. But here, the president continues to use Bitcoin as a rallying cry against dependence on the dollar.
Solo lo pongo aquí, so just put in the cash. See, we're gonna put in $200.
Across the country, Bitcoin ATMs convert greenbacks into digital currency. But sometimes you have to wait.
Preguntita, ¿aceptan Bitcoin? Do you guys take Bitcoin? Sí? Porque I'm having problems.
After a while, we stopped for coffee, hoping our Bitcoin would arrive before our check. The barista Carla tells us it's mostly tourists who pay in crypto, and says once somebody tweeted out the profile of her digital wallet, and the next thing she knew, she was getting thousands of dollars in tips from around the world.
Cada segundo cayendo tips, $1, $2, $3, $5, $10.
At one point, even $300 came from somebody totally anonymous.
But for us, still no Bitcoin, so we paid cash.
All right, vamos a ver si tengo dinero. Let's see if I have money. I still have zero money in this account. Pero aceptan dólares, ¿verdad? You guys take dollars?
Finally, 2.5 hours later.
Hey, we finally got our money. 2.5 hours later, $199.01. Not sure where the 99 cents went, but our money's on our phone.
El Salvador's tourism minister acknowledged that any new system is bound to have bumps, but said the goal is to give options to the 70% of Salvadorans without bank accounts. That's been the vision of President Bukele, she says, that opens the door for those that don't have access to banks. The International Monetary Fund has urged El Salvador to reverse course on Bitcoin, and U.S. lawmakers have raised concerns as well. In response, Bukele tweeted, "Okay, boomers, you have zero jurisdiction. We are not your colony, your backyard, or your front yard. Stay out of our internal affairs." In the capital, San Salvador, support for Bukele is overwhelming, but using Bitcoin remains a challenge. At this grocery store, we held up a line for 10 minutes as the cashier waited for our payment to clear.
They said that the transaction was declined, but on my Bitcoin wallet, it showed that it had gone through.
Then finally, at a pupuseria,
oh, there we go. Okay, this is the best transaction we've had so far.
An exchange of digital currency for a plate of El Salvador cuisine.
All right, Gadi Schwartz back from El Salvador joining us now here on Top Story. So, Gadi, my first question is, so we saw there in your report that if you're an American tourist and you're traveling, you want to catch waves, want to eat some good food, you can use this cryptocurrency. But what if you live in El Salvador? How easy is it for them to access all the goods they need?
Well, at the beginning of this experiment, the people of El Salvador were given $30 in Bitcoin in a Chivo wallet. That's the wallet that they use. And they went out, they tried to purchase things. Many of them were successful. Many of them weren't. And I'll give you an example of what happens when you get burned by some of these glitches. I went to the grocery store just to buy some everyday things. Bought about $14 worth of things. Chose the Bitcoin only line. No one else was in that line paying with Bitcoin. They were all paying with cash. And I get to the front and I try to pay with Bitcoin. And the transaction goes on my phone fine, but the cash register says that they haven't received anything. We wait 10 minutes and there are people lining up behind us. I mean, we're sweating. It's getting embarrassing, right? And people are like, what's the holdup? And we ended up having to go to lunch. We're like, can we go? This might take a while. And they're like, yeah, you got to leave the groceries here. We go to lunch. We try to pay Bitcoin there. They don't accept it. We come back and they're like, yeah, sorry, the transaction didn't go through. Well, in my Bitcoin wallet, $15 had left. It was gone. And they had never received it. So I ended up paying twice. And when you're in a country where the average monthly salary is like $300 for the month, and you lose $15 and you're burned that way, you might not be likely to do it again. Seems like an alternate reality. And on that point, I do want to ask you about the president of El Salvador. He is quickly becoming maybe the most popular leader in Latin America. What was your sense? It seemed from your report, people were happy with him. Yeah, people may not trust Bitcoin right now, but they trust their president overwhelmingly. We've seen the numbers. They say 85 to 90% approval rating. We were there. We talked to 2
24 working class Salvadorians, and they told us they support their president. We didn't meet a single working class person in El Salvador that did not support their president.
Are there not concerns about the corruption allegations, the allegations of human rights abuses possibly happening?
So right now, so many of them support the president because they see him as having a heavy hand when it comes to gangs, and they also see this Bitcoin promise as a way to try to get people in El Salvador to get more of the remittances that are sent back from the United States into their pocket. They see the effort there. They also see that 70% of people in El Salvador don't have access to bank accounts. And so when somebody promises them $30 in Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden they've never had a bank account before, and they have a place where they can safely have their money, and they have this idea of being able to save, those are concepts that resonate. It's just right now the technology is kind of janky, and it doesn't really work all the time. So they trust their president. They just don't trust the Bitcoin technology right now.
All right, Gadi Schwartz with a lot of new insight from El Salvador. Gadi, thank you. Coming up, devastation in South Africa. The rising death tolls, widespread flooding and mudslides wipe away homes, roads, and even bridges. We'll be right back. All right, back now with Top Stories Global Watch and an update on the catastrophic flooding and mudslides in South Africa. Authorities say more than 250 people have been killed near Durban. Homes destroyed and even a bridge swept away. Officials calling it one of the worst weather events in the country's history. The investigation tonight after a fire broke out at a shopping mall in Indonesia. This is new video. It shows flames shooting out from the upper floors of the mall. No word yet on what caused that fire or how many people have been injured. When we come back, the exclusive interview with former President Obama, what he told Al Roker about life beyond the White House. Stay with us. We are back now with that exclusive interview with President Obama, the 44th president, opening up about life after the White House, his new Netflix series, and how he's thinking about the midterm elections. Today, co-anchor Al Roker spent the afternoon with the former president at Great Falls National Park in Virginia and has more from that conversation.
Yeah. How's it feel being in this national park?
Well, you know what? Anytime we get out of the city and we're among trees and woods and critters, I feel better.
For former President Barack Obama, national parks are the backdrop for some of his favorite memories, from his first trip to Yellowstone to growing up in Hawaii.
The whole state almost is a national park. So the oceans, the coral reefs, the mountains, the forests, that was part of my everyday life.
Now, his new Netflix series, Our Great National Parks, showcases some of the world's most spectacular settings.
This is a journey through the natural wonders of our shared birthright.
The former president serving as both executive producer and narrator.
There's nowhere else you'll see a hippo in the Atlantic Ocean.
The series not just a feast for the eyes, but a lesson on the importance of protecting the parks and their wild residents.
I'm hoping that we're going to learn something not just about how to maintain national parks, but why it's so important to deal with issues like climate change that threaten the entire planet.
In fact, we have younger kids, Sasha Malia, this generation that demands us being better caretakers.
Yeah.
Will people seeing this heed that call?
Well, I think that the generation of our kids are more mindful of how we haven't always taken care of the planet. And with climate change affecting everything, they are demanding action. Nature is more resilient than we think if we are intentional about it.
In addition to spending his time out in nature, former President Obama has been navigating some political terrain, returning to the White House for the very first time just last week. How did that feel?
Well, you know, it was wonderful to see some of the old team. The fact that I could leave, though, was nice. Vice President Biden, Vice President.
When you made the Vice President Biden joke, were you a little surprised that people are like, hey, what's up with that?
No, you know, look, President Biden and I have an extraordinary friendship as well as a professional relationship.
What do you think is going to happen in this midterm election?
Well, it's too early to say. I think the Biden administration has overcome some extraordinary circumstances. COVID, the economy, and now most recently Ukraine, and they have handled the policy right. But look, understandably, people feel exhausted by COVID. That's going to dampen the mood of a country. Inflation is a real issue. A lot of it is having to do with the COVID and supply chains, and now Putin's gas tax, essentially, by virtue of his invasion of Ukraine. But the underlying economy, there's a good story to tell. Democrats have to go out there and tell the story. But ultimately, the voters decide on this thing.
Last month, Mr. Obama became one of the more than 80 million Americans who tested positive for COVID-19.
How are you feeling? I feel fine. I was fortunate that I did not get it until I had been vaccinated, I had been boosted, and I barely had symptoms.
Post-presidency, how has life changed for you, Michelle, Sasha, and Malia?
There's nothing that compares to the privilege and honor of serving the American people in the highest office of the land. You know, there are times where I miss the work. I don't miss the hoopla, though. And, you know, we're finding that we can be really productive, contributing citizens in all kinds of other ways.
All right, Al Roker joins us again now in studio. So, Al, I got to ask you, could you get a sense of how much President Obama is involved with President Biden still? There's Ukraine, the inflation, climate change. I wonder, is he calling the president, you think?
Look, the impression I get is that if asked, he will happily volunteer. I mean, I don't know that, but that's the feeling I get. But I don't think President Obama is picking up the phone to call President Biden and say, hey, Joe, I think you ought to do this. I think, he figures they know what they're doing.
He's been out of office a while now. It seems he's sort of comfortable in this new role, and you were telling me something funny happened where he hasn't lost a sense of humor either.
No, he hasn't. We were doing a national park scavenger hunt with some kids from the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington, and one little girl raises her hand. President Obama, you were born in Hawaii, right? He goes, absolutely, I was. And as he turns away, he goes, well, at least somebody knows where I was born.
You could joke about that now, right?
Exactly.
All right, Al, great interview. Thanks so much for joining us again. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.